eradication of criminals must be a mandate imposed by the citizenry upon their leaders.
Entire societies have learned that certain groups don't adapt to civilization.
I'm a piece of wood, lifeless until someone moves me, which is why I notice that your leaders resemble me. They lack autonomy.
Controlled by grand global agendas that promise prosperity while eroding national independence through initiatives disguised as progress and equity.
They actually sacrifice your freedom for interests that oppose national well-being.
Democracy is an almost perfect system with flaws, but the best we could have. Its failures are the fault of the societies and individuals that make up part of it.
That's what I've heard the puppet say. But isn't that a contradiction? If democracy can't adapt to the society that implements it, but instead depends on human perfection, then assuming it's the best system for all societies is a mistake. I've seen so-called dictatorships that are far more benevolent than the most praised democracies.
When a political project has profoundly and positively transformed a country, its opponents do not wait to compete once it leaves power. They wait to dismantle its legacy.
The method is predictable: media reconstruction of the narrative, negative reinterpretation of its achievements, and legal prosecution as a form of neutralization.
This process is a global pattern used to delegitimize those who bravely confront criminality and national decay, while simultaneously restoring the political elites displaced by projects that did not serve their interests. When these dynamics repeat over and over, democracy ceases to express the popular will
And becomes a device to ensure that no transformative project remains in power long enough to build a different future.
I don't fight, I stay still. And that's exactly how many leaders abandon the cultural battle, by remaining passive, whether out of ignorance or political calculation. This inaction allows divisive narratives to dominate through media and academia.
Once captured by ideological interests, they impose views that erode traditional values. This weakens unity, making external control easier.
Strong societies reclaim these spaces, promoting messages that celebrate shared identity, common sense, truth, and justice, thus bolstering resistance against forces seeking to fragment and dominate.
While radical feminists insist that society oppresses women through its structures, the law imposes obligations exclusively on men for the defense of the state.
This inequality is never mentioned in extremist rhetoric, because acknowledging it would mean accepting that asymmetry exists, but not in the direction their narrative claims.
The so-called male privilege evaporates the moment the state demands bodies for the front lines, and only half the population is sent to sacrifice itself for the well-being of the rest.
Multiculturalism, presented as an ideal of harmony, often turns into a nightmare. When imposed without considering the cultural roots of the territories, it dilutes the traditions that bind communities, fosters conflicts, and leads to social fragmentation.
Strong societies are built on shared values, not on forced coexistence that ignores irreconcilable differences, leaving room for external interests to manipulate the divisions they've created themselves.
Even as a wooden mannequin, I can see that multiculturalism is a failed experiment.
Gender ideology, by denying natural biological differences, fragments our understanding of human identity. It doesn't liberate but confuses, imposing views that ignore scientific and cultural evidence.
Stable societies are built on recognizing complementary roles, not on pursuing feminized men or women trying to act macho.
By prioritizing individual delusions over shared reality, it risks social cohesion, creating space for manipulations whose sole aim is to destroy the structures that sustain communities.
When a dictatorial regime reaches its terminal phase, the decisive question is not who topples it, but who governs afterward.
If the military, civil, and administrative institutions have been shaped for decades to respond solely to the ruler's fall degenerates into territorial disputes, the proliferation of armed groups, and the expansion of criminal economies competing for the remnants of the state that once restrained them.
This is why, once a tyrannical government is overthrown, it is essential that it be replaced by a leader capable of uniting both the civilian and military forces under a single direction. Otherwise, the country may fall into open-ended civil war.
Rejecting ideologies that promote child mutilation under the pretext of identity protects the physical and psychological well-being of those too young to understand the impact of their decisions.
These progressive agendas know the damage is irreversible, yet they push it anyway. Any society that cares for its children must prioritize defending biological reality, encouraging natural development without premature interventions.
This preserves the integrity of future generations, preventing malicious radicals from turning them into broken pieces of a cruel experiment. The agendas that push for the destruction of motherhood and the family under the disguise of women's liberation create deep social instability, striking directly at birth rates and at the pillars that hold communities together.
This damage, driven by radical feminist movements, benefits systems that prioritize extreme individualism. It harms women who, convinced that having children is a form of oppression, reach the end of their fertile years burdened with psychological issues.
And, in that same process, inflict irreversible harm on society, as many are pushed into becoming
Active agents of a legally accepted genocide against their own population, neatly packaged under the slogan, "My body, my choice."
Even I, without blood, without a future, can feel the misery these ideas inflict on humanity.
The priority of any governing leader must be to guarantee the security and well-being of their citizens, before obeying agendas and mandates imposed by supranational entities that have no real interest in the populations of the countries they influence.
The so-called human rights defenders and NGOs that in many cases prioritize the protection of criminals and terrorists should be recognized as a clear threat to national well-being, not because of their supposed good intentions, but because of the consistent harm they cause.
The eradication of criminals must be a mandate imposed by the citizenry upon their leaders, even if the very promoters of terrorism object.
I can't integrate. I'm a soulless object. But there are flesh and blood people who can't either. Entire societies have learned that certain groups don't adapt to civilization, and their mass arrival brings chaos, crime, and death.
The global invasion by these populations destroys cohesion, leaving an impossible coexistence. No one will ever shoot me. I'm just wood. But patriots do get shot. The truth embodied by these free men is a real threat to those who crave the destruction of nations. That's why leaders across different lands have fallen to bullets that always come from the same side, projectiles manipulated by people the truth terrifies and repulses, driven by resentment, while the media and politicians whip up the crowd shouting,
That's the far right. We have to finish them off because they think differently, and we, the tolerant ones, can't allow it.
But the deception is obvious. The violence never comes from where they claim, but always from their own ranks. Isn't it time we responded to violence with...
You're next.